A billionaire prince falls for a virgin servant until her secret royal bloodline shakes the entire kingdom. What came next left everyone in shock. A warm welcome to Beyond Color Stories. I'm your storyteller, James. And before we dive in, let me say a short, heartfelt prayer. May every soul listening find peace in love, healing in pain, and a spark of light in their darkest hour. May these stories always remind us that we're never truly alone. Family, I won't lie. My heart feels heavy. I'm shattered watching my viewership decline with every passing day. I've poured everything into these stories, nights without sleep, words from the deepest parts of me, just to bring you something raw, beautiful, unforgettable. But lately, YouTube has been brutal. My reach has vanished. So today, I'm not just coming to you as a creator. I'm coming to you as someone who believes in what we built here. I ask only this. Please share this story with 3 people. Let's not let the algorithm bury what we love. Let's keep this heartbeat alive. Support me if you can. And in the comments, keep the flame going. I need your stories, your voices. Let's echo through the silence. Remind the world who we are. I know this community is strong. We'll rise again, together. So hit subscribe. And now, let's begin. Amelia's first steps into the royal palace were hesitant, like a feather drifting into a storm. The grand ancient doors creaked open, embracing her with a stillness soaked in majesty. She had always dreamed of such wonders, but never thought she'd walk through them as a servant. She wasn't royalty, she wasn't nobility, just a girl from the outer villages, a nobody among kings and queens. Yet here she was, basket in hand, heart thundering in her chest. Her long braids flowed over her shoulders like silk threads touched by sunlight, and the locket at her throat sparkled with secret meaning. Eyes followed her every step, some filled with judgment, others cloaked in curiosity. Servants gossiped, nobles sneered, but Amelia kept her chin raised, defiant in her quiet way. She didn't shrink, she didn't stumble. Her spirit refused to bend beneath the palace's icy scrutiny. Among the marble pillars and glistening chandeliers, Amelia moved like poetry, gentle but sure. Her clothes were plain, her hands calloused, her apron stained with garden soil. Yet she carried herself with an elegance not even the royal court could fake. Her eyes held the calm weight of secrets, deep as oceans. That contrast, a simple girl wrapped in quiet strength, drew attention, even if none could name why. But one man noticed more than most. Prince Glenn Robert, the kingdom's crown jewel, powerful, poised, yet now completely spellbound by the girl across the hall. Glenn stood with nobles, his posture regal, but his gaze locked entirely on her. He didn't understand why. Something about her unsettled him. The way she walked, the way her presence lingered like perfume in a room. It pulled at him, compelled him. He tried to brush it off, to turn his attention back to Lord Alden, who spoke of tournaments and political matters. But Glenn's thoughts refused to settle. Every breath Amelia took seemed to ripple through him, dragging his attention back to her. "Prince Glenn," Lord Alden said again, smirking. Glenn blinked. "Are you listening?" The prince forced a nod, words jumbled in his throat. "Yes, of course," he murmured, his mind still tangled in the memory of her eyes, even if she hadn't looked at him directly. Amelia passed by again, arms full of flowers, her posture straight, movements smooth and natural. Glenn couldn't tear his gaze away. She was nothing like the painted courtesans and jeweled princesses he'd known. She was unadorned and yet dazzling. It hit him then. This girl was no ordinary servant. She stirred something dormant in him, something ancient, electric. He watched her like a man seeing color for the first time, like a wanderer discovering water in the desert. He didn't yet know her story, but he needed to. Her quiet mystery pulled at him like the moon on the tide. Something within her whispered of hidden truths, of bloodlines buried and power unspoken. In the royal chambers that night, Glenn tossed and turned in his bed. He wasn't one to believe in fate, but something had shifted, something had begun. His thoughts spun around her. Who was she really? And why did he care so deeply, so suddenly? The next morning he saw her again. She tried to avoid his gaze, but Glenn stepped forward, his voice soft yet firm. You? What is your name? She froze, startled, eyes lowered. Amelia, Your Highness, she replied, voice gentle but unwavering. Amelia, he echoed, tasting her name like honey. You've been here for some time, haven't you? Yes, Your Highness, she answered without lifting her eyes. But her calmness intrigued him. No trembling, no flattery, just truth. How long? He pressed, studying her. 20 years, she said quietly. Glenn took a step closer, noticing the faint blush warming her cheeks. He wanted to know her. His voice, low and intimate, broke the silence. Don't call me that, he murmured, his tone hushed as if sharing a secret meant only for her. It wasn't cold or commanding, as she might have expected from someone of his stature. Instead, it was filled with an unexpected warmth, vulnerability even, that caught her off guard. The prince of the realm, the very heir to the throne, speaking to her like she was more than just a servant. His words hung in the air between them, heavy and loaded with meaning. Amelia could hardly believe what she had heard. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her mind froze, caught between the pounding of her heart and the intensity of his gaze. She hadn't expected this. A moment so intimate, so fleeting, yet so powerful. His voice, so gentle, reverberated in her chest, stirring something inside her she couldn't ignore. Before she could respond, Glenn's hands gently guided her back onto her feet. She stumbled slightly, her legs still shaky from the fall, but his steady presence kept her upright. She felt the warmth of his touch on her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. There was something in the way his fingers brushed her arm that made her heart race, a spark that ignited a feeling she didn't want to acknowledge, couldn't afford to. Without saying another word, Glenn stepped back, his eyes lingering on her for a heartbeat longer before he turned away and walked briskly toward the palace doors. Amelia stood rooted in place, her breath shallow, chest rising and falling with the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She watched him leave, her mind in a haze. The feeling of his arms around her still lingered, as though they had left an imprint on her soul. She didn't know why, but the ache in her chest only grew stronger. The moment had been brief, fleeting, and yet it had changed everything. She could feel it, that pull, that undeniable connection that had ignited between them. It was dangerous. She knew she should forget it, dismiss it. But as she stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, she couldn't help but ache for him. What was happening to her? What was it about him that made her feel this way? She didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain. She was starting to fall for him, and that terrified her. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that cloaked the world in a soft, comforting blanket. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its pale light over the palace gardens, turning the lush greenery into a silver sea. Glenn had been restless for hours, his mind consumed by thoughts of Amelia. The moment they had shared earlier that afternoon lingered like a haunting melody. He couldn't shake the image of her trembling in his arms, or the words they had exchanged, echoes looping through his thoughts. His curiosity, his desire to understand her, had grown into something far deeper. Unable to sleep, he found himself drawn to the gardens. The path wound through the trees and flowers, each step carrying him closer to her. Then he heard it, a sound, soft, ethereal, a voice, her voice, not in memory this time, but real, floating on the night air like a lullaby sung to the stars. He paused, heart pounding. She was singing. He followed the sound in silence until he saw her, seated on a stone bench bathed in moonlight. Her long, braided hair shimmered like silver, her gaze lost in the sky above. There was something otherworldly about her. She didn't look like a servant girl in that moment. She looked like someone who had fallen from the stars. Amelia didn't notice him at first, too wrapped in the song, her voice soft as moonlight on water. Glenn stood quietly, mesmerized. The world melted away. No crown, no court, no duty, only her. At last he stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Where did you learn that?" She gasped softly, turning toward him. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stop. She hadn't expected anyone to find her here, least of all the prince. Her lips parted, but all she could manage was a shrug. I don't know, she said quietly. I've always known it. There was a distant look in her eyes as if the song had been born from some hidden place in her soul. Glenn felt something stir inside him. Watching her like that, so raw, so honest, he couldn't speak. So he sat beside her, closer than propriety allowed. The air thickened with the weight of nearness. He could smell the faint scent of rain on her skin. Something earthy. Something... her. They said nothing for a while, letting the silence stretch between them. He studied her features in the moonlight, the shimmer of her braid, the softness of her skin, the galaxies behind her eyes. You don't belong among the servants, he murmured, voice steady. The truth hung between them. Simple, complicated. She inhaled sharply and looked away. Then where do I belong, she whispered. Her voice trembled, a question spoken from somewhere deep and vulnerable. Glenn's chest tightened. He wanted to say, with me, but the words caught. He couldn't risk it. Not yet. Instead, he reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers with reverence. Let me find out, he said softly. And with that, everything shifted. His heart was no longer his own. It belonged to her. Veil of her mask, and for a breathless instant, time obeyed them and paused. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The world around them blurred. Nobles twirled in rhythm, jewels clinked in laughter, and chandeliers threw golden halos. But all Glenn could see was her, his Amelia. No title could cage what he saw in her now. A quiet strength, a sorrow buried deep, and a fire that refused to die. He extended a hand. May I have this dance? Amelia hesitated, heart thudding. Every nerve screamed at her to run, to flee the heat of his gaze, the pull of the truth, the war she knew was coming. But something stronger, something that had bloomed that night in the stables, when he held her with more than arms, made her lift her hand and place it in his. He led her to the floor. They danced. And the music, the masks, the politics, the danger, none of it mattered. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, not rehearsed but destined. Every turn, every breath was a conversation they'd never dared to have. She could feel the warmth of his hand against her back, guiding her, steadying her. He could feel the beat of her pulse through her palm. Real, alive, noble in a way no crown could ever define. Around them, whispers began to stir. Who is she? Why her? Why him? But behind their masks they danced undeterred. You're glowing, Glenn murmured, his lips barely brushing her ear. It's the candlelight, she replied softly, daring a smile. No, he said, it's you. Amelia's gaze faltered, a storm rising behind her eyes. This will end badly. You know that. He pulled her a fraction closer. Then let it. I'd rather fall with you than rise alone. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the look in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, the shelter he offered. But the world beyond the ballroom was sharp and cruel, and she was no fool. As the music swelled toward its crescendo, she felt it building too, the inevitable. The truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. Bloodlines had a way of surfacing, and love like this, it didn't survive quietly. Still, when the final note echoed and he didn't let go, when his masked face hovered inches from hers, when their breaths mingled like a secret, they both knew something had already changed. Not just between them, but within them. And neither was turning back. Not tonight. Not ever. I'll burn the palace before I lose you, he vowed, his voice low and fierce. The words held an unspoken promise, a declaration of his love and loyalty to her, no matter the cost. Amelia's breath hitched, her lips trembling against the weight of his vow. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But the world outside this hidden corner had already sharpened its knives. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice cracking like glass underfoot. They don't want the truth. They want a scapegoat, and I'm easier to erase than their lies. I don't care, Glenn said. Let them scheme. Let them deny. I will not let them erase you. He pulled her to her feet, gently brushing the hay from her skirt, his hands lingering as if anchoring her to something real. You are not alone anymore, Amelia. And if I must stand before the council 1,000 times, if I must face my mother and the wrath of the court, I will do it again and again, until they see you. Their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw it. Unyielding fire, a promise forged in something stronger than duty. He cupped her cheek, wiping away a tear with the pad of his thumb. "But I need you to fight too," he murmured. "Not just for me, for you, for your mother, for every year you were made to believe you were nothing." She closed her eyes and took a breath that tasted of rain and old hope. When she opened them again, her voice was steadier. "Then teach me," she said. "Teach me how to fight like a royal." A small smile touched his lips. "You already do. You survived them. That's more than most of us can say." Outside, thunder began to roll across the sky, echoing through the mountains like drums of a distant rebellion. Glenn took her hand, twining his fingers through hers. "Come, you won't hide anymore." They stepped into the open together, no longer prince and servant, but something greater. Two pieces of truth, reunited. The palace would rise in judgment. The court would retaliate with venom. The queen would strike like a wounded lioness. But the truth could not be buried forever. Not when it walked boldly through the great doors of the royal court, hand in hand with the man who would burn kingdoms for her. In the hush of the stables, their kiss spoke the deepest truths their hearts had long carried. A vow of love no trial could break. As they slowly pulled apart, their gazes remained locked, and within their eyes flickered a shared certainty. This was not a passing infatuation. It was something immovable, something no twist of fate could undo. That kiss had sealed more than a moment. It had bound their souls. Wrapped in each other's arms, hidden away from the world, Glenn and Amelia found a moment of peace amid the chaos of the palace. Outside, the storm brewed quietly, unseen but inevitable. The truth of Amelia's lineage, once cloaked in shadow, was about to blaze into light, bringing consequences neither of them had prepared for. But in that fleeting, sacred breath of time, their love triumphed over fear. And then, the sun rose. Its golden rays fell upon the kingdom. But within the palace, the mood was far from calm. The royal court had convened, nobles, courtiers, and servants filling the grand halls, murmuring with anticipation. No one could have predicted what this day would bring. Not war, not politics, but rebellion of the heart against tradition itself. At the center of it stood Crown Prince Glenn. He walked with unshakable purpose down the corridor toward the council chamber, his heartbeat steady, strengthened by the presence of the woman beside him, Amelia. No longer a servant, no longer hidden in the shadows of a life she was never meant to live. Today she would step forward as who she truly was, the rightful princess. The chamber doors burst open. Silence fell like a shroud as all eyes turned toward the pair. Glenn, regal and resolute, held Amelia's hand in his own, and in that grasp was a kingdom's worth of meaning. No longer in the background, she stood like light itself had finally found its rightful place. The head of the council, a man known for his biting clarity, spoke first. "What is this, Your Highness? What have you brought before us?" Glenn's eyes didn't flicker. With quiet defiance, he stepped forward, holding Amelia's hand higher. "This," he said, voice echoing through the chamber, "is Princess Amelia Eleonora, and she is the woman I love." The chamber erupted into gasps, whispers crashing like waves. Disbelief rippled through the ranks. Some nobles frozen, others muttering furiously behind gloved hands. At the far end of the room, the queen sat in unreadable stillness, her gaze heavy with emotion, and perhaps regret. Amelia stood tall, though every nerve screamed beneath her skin. For so long she'd been a shadow, but now Glenn's hand steadied her, reminded her she belonged. Here. Now without pause, Glenn raised a scroll and a crest. "Here is the royal seal from the archives, the letter written by Princess Eleanor herself, and the emblem of her bloodline. These are not stories. They are truths. Amelia is not a servant. She is more royal than many who stand in this room, and she is mine." A stunned silence followed. The council stared at the items, faces pale and unreadable. Some bowed their heads in reluctant reverence. Others rose in anger, shouting of betrayal, of tradition shattered. But Glenn didn't waver. "They can't take you from me," he whispered to Amelia, his voice trembling only with love. Tears welled in her eyes. For years, she'd carried the weight of invisibility. But now her truth stood in the light. She was no longer an orphan of the palace halls. She was a princess, a rightful heir. At last, the queen's voice cut through the noise, cold and sharp as steel. You dare bring this disgrace before me? This is betrayal, not just of the crown, but of all we have built. But Glenn stood taller still. Number, this is not betrayal, it is the truth. And nothing, not even you, can change that. The queen's mask cracked. Her pride, once impenetrable, showed its first fractures. Before her stood not a servant girl, but the rightful heir, flesh of her flesh, blood of her blood. Silence reigned once more. Then one by one, nobles bowed, some with sincerity, others with bitterness. But they bowed all the same. Amelia's heart swelled as tears spilled freely. At last they saw her, the woman she had always been. Her hands trembled, but Glenn caught them with his, steady and sure. He leaned closer. You are more than the woman I love. You are my future, my queen. Her breath caught. In that moment, the world receded. There was only him, only them. Later, when she arrived at the rooftop, a different chapter unfolded. There was no driver, only a familiar voice from the speakers. Albert's voice, guiding her through the streets like a map of memories. When the car stopped, she stepped into a garden of lights. Thousands of fairy lights glowed like stars strung just for her. Roses bloomed in gentle lantern light. A melody, her favorite, played softly on strings. And there stood Albert. In his signature black suit, a single white rose at his lapel, he turned to her like he'd waited a lifetime just to see her again. He took her hand and led her to a candlelit table, every detail whispering her name, the dessert she secretly loved, the wine she'd once laughed about, the petals spelling her name in soft cursive. They didn't speak of plans, just memories, laughter, the warmth of small stories, her burned toast, his jealous glances, the note from Rome he kept in his wallet. Then as the sun dipped low, Albert rose and gently pulled her to the rooftop center. As soft music began again, he knelt, not with grand fanfare, but with the quiet reverence that had always marked his love. From his pocket, he drew a ring, a custom piece, shaped like a delicate ink droplet, with a diamond center that shimmered like her eyes in morning light. You were the poem my soul needed to read, he whispered. Let me be your forever, not just in moments, but in lifetimes. Shirley, speechless for a heartbeat, felt her tears fall freely. I was yours, she whispered, voice cracking, before I even knew you. And though no one clapped, the wind applauded. The stars blinked their approval. And when he slid the ring onto her finger, it wasn't just a proposal, it was the beginning of forever. Later, they curled together on a quiet bench in the rooftop garden he built for her. No talk of abstract futures, just dreams. Flowers on windowsills, children with her laugh in his eyes, handwritten notes on pillows. In that moment, Shirley realized this was no fairy tale. This was real, extraordinary, quiet, breathtaking reality, where love wasn't rare or distant, but a million soft promises whispered every day. And as she nestled closer into Albert's arms, she smiled, thinking of the first note she left him. Just a scrap of paper. But now it was the seed that had grown into a garden of forever. Became legend not through battles or ballads, but through the way it endured, quietly, steadfastly, with the kind of grace that doesn't seek attention, but deserves it. Their story, of Shirley and Albert, of Amelia and Glenn, was never about perfection. It was about presence. It was about choosing love again and again, even on the days it felt like work, especially on those days. Years later, in quiet corners of gardens and palace halls, children would run beneath braided arches of roses, and elders would tell them tales not of dragons or curses, but of a girl who spoke through silence, and a man who listened so intently he rewrote his legacy with love. Of a queen who once walked in shadows, and a king who lifted her into the light, not with power, but with patience. And in those stories, they would find themselves. Because the truest love is not the loudest. It is the love that lingers in everyday things, in soft morning light, in laughter over burnt toast, in the hush before a kiss, in the notes tucked away, in the hands never let go. And so, beneath stars and lanterns and the ever-turning rhythm of time, their love continued. Not just as memory, but as movement, as tradition passed down in braids and lullabies, in journals and whispered prayers. They were not fairy tales. They were truths. And in the echo of every vow, every breath, every heartbeat, they lived, always, quietly, fully, forever.